Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Corporate and Executive Education at the Brown School of Professional Studies. We are so excited that you have joined us today for this masterclass on the 5 Agilities approach to navigate uncertainty. If you are anything like me, I think that you've probably experienced amongst the most uncertainty we've maybe ever experienced in our lives in the last couple of months alone. And so that's why I was particularly excited that Dr. Baba Prasad agreed to teach this masterclass at this time, because I think this is a crucial skill that is going to help us navigate both today and get ready for tomorrow. So I'm very excited to get to learn alongside you. And by way of introduction, I want to give you just a little bit of context about where you are at virtually with us right now and how we can be your lifelong partners in your career goals and in navigating and achieving them. So the Brown School of Professional Studies, our vision is to give you the skills that you need to transform the way the world works for good. And that is a vision I am consistently inspired by, because every year Gallup does a really impactful survey where they survey thousands of individuals from all different industries and fields. And they ask a lot of questions actually, but the one that I'm always most interested in is they ask the question of, are you engaged at work? And pretty consistently, about 70% of US workers reply, no, they are not engaged at work. And this has huge ramifications for us as leaders in terms of the productivity, innovation, and output that we get from our teams. And it has huge implications for us as individuals, because being disengaged from over half of our waking lives, it's not a good place to be. It leads to mental and emotional health negative outcomes because it doesn't feel good to be disengaged. But that same survey finds that managers and leaders of both projects and teams have a disproportionate impact on that level of engagement. So just by being here today, by raising your hand and saying that this is a skill that you want to learn, you are actually stepping into the potential opportunity to have a disproportionate impact on the lives and level of engagement of your coworkers, your teams, and your collaborators. So thank you for being here, and thank you for choosing us to be that partner in helping you transform the way the world works for good. And we hope that you'll consider us your lifelong partner. So at any stage in your career, whatever your career goal may be, I hope that you will look to see whether we have a program that matches your needs. And I think we're pretty confident that we do. So if you're looking for a master's degree, we offer 33 professional and early career masters, primarily in leadership, healthcare, and technology topics that are residential, hybrid, or fully online. We also can customize programs for you. So if you have a need where you'd like to have your entire organization, your entire department, your entire team trained on a specific topic, we can work with you to design and deliver that curriculum on campus or to your office or online. And then in addition, we have over 30 non-credit courses that are short courses and certificate programs on the top in-demand skills that you need to remain competitive in your world and also to help transform the way the world works for good. And this masterclass is a component of those non-credit courses. We also offer multi-session and multi-course options. And one specific one I want to highlight is one that Baba teaches, and I love this course. Our Effective and Ethical AI course is a 3-week, 6-session live online course where you would meet 2 times per week for an hour and a half per meeting. And this course, it aims to give you the skills, the frameworks, and the practice to identify how to optimize your human and technology resources in the age of AI. Something we've been hearing a lot of feedback about is that often in AI courses, we leave the humans out of the course, and that is a huge mistake because our human workforce is one of our greatest advantages. And so actually the skill set we need as leaders is the skill set to be able to identify which tasks should remain firmly with your human resources, which tasks can be automated for efficiency and effectiveness, and how do we make sure that both sides are learning from one another and collaborating together well. And so over the course of this 6-session course, You will build competency, confidence, and practice opportunities in leadership skills that will help you to integrate this workforce seamlessly to meet the demands of the future with this new emerging technology. And we hope you'll join us for cohort 2, which will start in September or October. Exact dates to be announced, but if you fill out the interest form on our website, you'll be the first to know when we've announced new dates. So these are my last reminders to you before I introduce and hand things over to Baba. Our reminder is that if you have a question, please click on the bottom bar of Zoom and click on Q&A and type and submit your question there. I will be monitoring the Q&A throughout and anticipate getting a lot of questions. So the earlier you can submit your question to me, the more I can help merge them and get through as many questions as possible. If, however, you would like to instead contribute a comment on something that you're hearing, we welcome that as well. And please do that by clicking on the bottom bar of Zoom and clicking on chat and submitting your comment there. And with that, I'm very delighted to introduce and hand things over to Dr. Baba Prasad, who is our professor of the practice at the Brown University School of Professional Studies. He is an author and expert in the fields of strategic management, innovation, and leadership. He's known for his work on agile leadership, which we need desperately right now, and organizational agility, and wrote the book Nimble, Make Yourself and Your Company Resilient in the Age of Constant Change. And in that book, he advances theories of human intelligence and strategic leadership to arrive at a unique framework for executives and organizations to adapt and thrive in a rapidly changing environment. And that is the 5 Agilities framework that we're going to look at together in a moment. He also has a background in robotics and artificial intelligence and management with degrees in the Indian Institute of Science, the University of Hyderabad, Kansas State University, and the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. We are very lucky that he has joined us at Brown full-time after having been at several other institutions and also being quite a prolific writer in the USA and India. So thank you so much for being here, Baba. Welcome, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Allison. I'll start off with sharing my screen. Okay, great. So a couple of months ago, we did this introduction to the 5 frameworks, Agilities framework in 5 Agilities framework in a similar context, in a similar masterclass. But there, and some of you might have attended that. But there, my context was more about company and strategy and how an organization can deal with uncertainty and manage to be nimble amidst rapid change. Okay. And this time, though, my focus will be more on the leadership aspect and how individuals can actually be leaders. Okay. And one of the key things that we premises that this masterclass and my thinking on this in this field is based on is the fact that to lead is human. I'm paraphrasing Alexander Pope's "to err is human" statement, but to lead is human. And just think about this: if you were to, if you willy-nilly, whether we like it or not, we're leaders all the time. Yeah. As parents, we're leading our children. As supervisors in the workforce, we're leading people who report to us. Within, everyday context, a friend asks for advice, we're a leader. Our superior can ask us for a comment or an opinion, and we're leading. So it is, in fact, leadership is thrust on us. And the fact is, the idea is, and if we are always born to be leading, are we good leaders or not? How can we be good leaders? And this problem is actually, just like, in an organization, when you see things like leadership, this particular organization is very nimble. Now the question comes up, is the organization nimble or is the human nimble? Is there a leadership that's nimble? So much like, W.B. Yeats's, the Irish poet Yeats's comment, how can you tell the dancer from the dance, right? So this is exactly the situation. If a company or an organization is nimble, is agile, is the leadership agile or is the organization agile? So this leadership is very, very important for us to deal with. And the fact is that there is no boundary to leadership. Does not stop that when you leave your workplace that you stop leading. Actually, you lead in everyday life. And this is a model for what we would call quotidian or everyday leadership. And I'm going to get into that now. But the problem with leadership, with everyday leadership, is that we're constantly buffeted by, shocks, change that happens. So for instance, polarized politics. Today's world, we're seeing all this stuff happen. There's tremendous polarized politics, and so nobody talks to each other. And how do we then negotiate across borders, across boundaries? Climate concerns. Some tsunami happens somewhere, an earthquake happens somewhere. How does that affect us? In a generational shift. So, for instance, we're talking to our children and we don't know how to interact with them. So that's an everyday kind of situation. That same thing spills over into workforces, where a lot of organizations are dealing with differences between millennials and Gen Z and the baby boomers. So all these kinds of things happen within organizations and outside of them. And of course, underlying everything is the tech disruption. Tremendous kinds of technologies coming in, changing the ways we work, changing the ways we live. And of course, add to this complexity is the AI stuff that's coming in and affecting us in everyday life. So given this, the question is, how do we deal with this? And of course, the simple answer is we need to be nimble. But this is easier said than done. Okay, we all know what we need to be nimble, and of course, people like Warren Bennis, very respected scholar of leaderships, who was at University of Southern California. After 50 years of doing research, he wrote this. He said, if I was to pick one competence for that is absolutely essential for leaders, it is something that he would call adaptive capacity and what I call nimbleness. And that is what allows leaders to respond quickly and intelligently to relentless change. So based on this, I've developed what we could call a framework for agilities, and I use that in the plural. And the reason I use that is I want to pose a simple, everyday question to you. And I'm more interested in a process by which you would solve this problem. If I was to say, ask you, how would you cook a dish with chickpeas if you don't know the recipe? I'll give you a quick minute to think about it. But this is a problem that's been put across to you, and how would you respond to this? And I'm interested more in the process. Well, in a normal class, I would give you time and I would make this a discussion point. But here, since we're doing a master class and we want to move quickly through ideas, here's what several ideas come up. Okay? Some people may say, I'll look up a recipe online or in a cookbook. That's a good answer. Somebody may say, actually, I'll start boiling a small batch and see how I can change that and test this whole recipe step by step. So I'm actually getting into actual making of the food. A third person might say, I know that there is a recipe for another kind of legume. So can I use that? Can I adapt that recipe for this one? Okay. And the fourth answer might be, I can call a friend who knows how to cook chickpeas, and I can use that recipe. Okay. Now, none of these is wrong, and this is the important aspect that I want to drive, that this is very contextual. If I have a cookbook that has a recipe for cooking chickpeas, I don't need to call any friend. I don't need to test. I don't need to adapt any recipe. I can pull that out. So it's a context, right, that drives this response. But it's also a kind of a predilection. We have certain affinities to certain kinds of solutions, and so we respond to that. So now these four things are what I would classify as one is an analytical response where I'm looking through a database, I'm doing some research, or the second would be an operational thing where I actually get into action and start doing stuff. The third response I would classify as inventive, and the fourth response is communicative. Now, these are four different agilities, as I would call them, which allow us to respond to different situations, to a problem in different ways. Now, this leads to what I call the 5 agilities framework. So the 5 agilities are this. Analytical agility allows us to shift between different kinds of analytical approaches. So for instance, I'm doing I'm analyzing problems in a certain kind of way. Can I shift because the problem has shifted? Okay. Can I shift this? So a simple example might be, I do my tax returns every year, but this year the tax return laws or rules have changed. So how do I change that? Okay. Second one would be operational agility, where something breaks down, something doesn't work the way that it usually does. So do I have an alternate way of doing this stuff? It's achieving the same goal. So this is doing things in a different ways. Yeah. The third one is inventive agility. Now, I never solved this problem. I've never seen this problem, but can I think up a solution? Can I create a new product, or can I create a new process to solve this? So this is the inventive agility. And the fourth one is communicative agility, okay, which we talked about just now, where I say, it's not just about calling and talking to people, but actually leadership through collaboration, leadership through persuasion. And different audiences might need different ways of collaborating. Different audiences may need different ways to be persuaded. So am I capable of moving my message across, or delivering my message in different ways? Now, these four agilities allow us to respond quickly to situations. And you might need a mix of these. So for instance, I might need to be communicative and inventive, or I might need to be communicative and operational, or some way. So these are four different agilities that you're mixing to solve a particular problem. But what I've found in my research is that it's not enough, because these four agilities allow you to be reactive. Okay, you're not being strategic. And people have found, researchers have found, that the most effective leaders are those who have a strategic intent when they're solving a problem. And that comes from what I call the visionary agility, which allows you to think beyond the here and now, so beyond the present moment and beyond the present problem, to think about, what would be the future impact of this. I'll give you a quick example. Um, and from an everyday life. Let's say that my child has been disciplined at school, and it's very unfair that she's been disciplined at school. Okay, and I have the facts, and I have the situation. I understand the situation, and I am very, very angry with the principal and the administration. So I march into school. I have the option of marching into school with all my data here, and I can challenge the principal, and maybe I can convince them that the disciplining was unfair. But on the other hand, if I sit back and let my visionary agility think, let come into picture, then I might say, that's not the right approach, because I might solve this problem. What are the problems that it can cause for my child in the school environment? What kinds of things can this particular reactive response lead to? Right. And that's why visionary agility is very, very important. It kind of gives you that strategic intent. It gives you the long term. It tempers reaction and allows it to be much more long term and strategic. So these are the five different agilities. And I've covered, there's a Alison mentioned in the introduction that this comes from the theory of human intelligences, and especially stuff that was done in multiple intelligences theory, both at Harvard and Yale. And I've built on those and adapted it to both organizational context and to business context. And that's how these five different agilities come in. And I will leave that to the book, of which there were two editions, 2015 and 2018, and both are available on Amazon. So I won't get into that detail here, but this is the framework, okay, that we have these five different agilities, and these can be used to solve various problems in organizations. Okay, so going forward, I want to give you a case study to show how this actually applies in real life. Okay? And the case study is based on the ex-Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who, let me just move, okay, who became the leader of the Labour Party just 7 weeks out from the 2017 election. And at that point, the party was in doldrums. Its opinion polls were ranking it at its lowest in 20 years. And at this time, Jacinda Ardern took over as the leader of the party and actually led the Labour Party to a second place finish, okay, and made them gain 15 seats beyond what they had before. And as a result, because of the coalition government that emerged, she became the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Okay. And this was historic because not only had she led the party from where it was to becoming the Prime Minister, but also she was the youngest female head of government in the world at the age of 37. Okay. Now, this she's noted, I mean, many things. She was noted for handling many kinds of crises, including COVID crisis, for which she was criticized a bit for being hard-handed. Um, and then also there were some issues with aborigine unrest, and so she handled that. But I'm going to focus on something that happened pretty early in her career as prime minister, which was the massacre that happened in Christchurch in 2019. So here's what happened. March 15th, 2019, a white supremacist went into two mosques in Christchurch and opened fire, and he killed 51 people, and 89 people were injured. This turned out to be the deadliest mass shooting in New Zealand's history. So this was a time when anger was its highest. People were very angry. There was, all kinds of accusations and retributions being planned. And at this time, Jacinda Ardern stepped in with a response. So when, this kind of national trauma, her response was not just political. It was also moral and emotional. And as a case study, it demonstrated all five leadership agilities. And this is how she did it. Now, underlying everything was visionary agility. She thought strategic, she thought about the long term, she talked big picture. And so what she said was, let's reframe this tragedy, not just as an attack on the Muslim community, but it is an attack on the values of all New Zealanders. And so she said, although the victims are all mostly migrants who have come here, and maybe perhaps some people were refugees, she said, to quote her, they have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us. And that shifted the narrative from fear and revenge to one of solidarity. And it made the national identity become more important, and an inclusive national identity become all the more important. So what she did in this whole reframing was that she looked at the repercussions of the event beyond the event, okay, and brought in what a response that is grounded in empathy and the multicultural nature of New Zealand's population. So this was the grounding force for her. And this led all the other agilities. It kind of focused all the other agilities to do things that had this long-term vision. Let's look at each of them. So from an analytical perspective, so from the analytical agility, what she did was she looked at the root causes of why this happened. And she addressed them both at the local and global levels. She quickly understood that there are links. This is not just an one-time thing. There are actually links between white supremacist ideology on the one hand and online radicalization on the other hand. And also complicating this mix was social alienation. So she said that if we have to stop this problem, it has to be not just addressing this one white supremacist and kind of trying him and making him, become assigning all blame to him, but actually look at it from a systemic perspective. And that's what the analytical agility is allowing her to do. And following this, she formed a group called the Christchurch Call, which became a global initiative to handle extremist content online. Okay. So she got various countries like France, etc., to sign this, to join this Christchurch Call, and involve many tech companies to think about, what kind of content are they promoting online that promotes this kind of extremist views. So how would they temper that? How would they, use technology to kind of calm down those passions? So this became her call for analytical agility. Then the operational agility. So this was a very, very rapid policy response. Okay. Within 6 days, as many of you might recall, New Zealand announced a ban on military-style automatic weapons. And instead of being bogged down by bureaucracy, she worked across party lines and got a legislation passed with near unanimous support in the parliament. And as a result, these changes where people turned in their automatic weapons, they had a system by which they had a program by which they would turn in, military style weapons. People across the country would turn them in, and that delivered swift and tangible change because people were seeing on TV, they could see people turning in weapons. Okay, so this was a very high stake logistical move, right, and operational kind of stuff implemented with precision. So this was a very good example of operational agility. And then, of course, the inventive agility. So where she said she started using social rituals, okay, which are things like, visiting families, hugging survivors, uttering words of, condolence. And this became part of governance, not a public relations exercise. And this whole idea of touch therapy became actually a way of handling grief. Okay? And so, as a result, what she did was she positioned national leadership not as decision making, but as mourning. And she became the mourner in chief. As the prime minister, she was leading the mourning. And as a result, she combined the empathy. So you could see that the empathy that she was expressing was combined with implementation. And this set of actions, and like me, people who are talking like me and making this a case study, tell you that this kind of response becomes a template for how leaders should respond ethically across the world in different contexts when they have crises like this. Now, finally, and this is, I think, the highlight of what she was doing, was communicative agility. She learned, or she put into practice, how one could work across cultural lines. So when she went to meet Muslim families, as the picture shows here, she wore a hijab just to show solidarity. And her statements were compassionate and resolute. One of the interesting things that she did was she would not name the shooter because she said, if I name the shooter, he's going to become famous, and I'm not going to make him famous. Instead, I'm going to name the survivors, and I'm going to name the victims who died because of the shooting. And her communication was constantly adapted to meet the emotional needs of diverse communities. So when she was talking to the Muslim, families that had lost people, she talked to them in a different way than she was talking to people, persuading them to turn in their guns and turning their military style weapons as a result of the ban. And her body language, tone, and language conveyed deep empathy along with the sense of authority. And this is a classic, example of how one would use the five agilities to solve a particular problem. Now, as a professor, I have to give you some things to think about, right? So let me give you some three questions that you can think about. Not now, right now, but you can take this away. So if you were to think about this case, which agility do you think was the most important in Arden's response? Okay. Could your organization or you as a leader respond with similar agility in a moment of crisis? Why? Why not? And finally, what would it take to operationalize empathy in your leadership practice? And remember, I'm talking about leadership not as a title that's been given to you, but as a way of life. So as you go through life, as you think about various things that happen, what kind of agility would you need? What kinds of agilities do you have? What kinds of agilities do you need to develop? So these are things that I would highlight here. So that I can offer more time for questions, let me sum up here. There are five agilities, and we need to have all five agilities to be good leaders. Okay, and these agilities are analytical, operational, inventive, communicative, and visionary. Now, do we need all of these? Depends on the context. Okay, so in some contexts we may need only one. In some contexts we may need a mix. But whatever we do, we can mix different kinds of things, just like we would have the mixing of primary colors to get a particular color for a paint. We mix the primary colors, we mix the primary agilities, which are analytical, operational, inventive, and communicative, but we mix them with the medium of visionary. Now, why do we need to do that? Because to be leaders, we need to be strategic. Okay? It's not just enough to be reactive right now and say, hey, this is how we handle things. Let's solve this problem. But we need to have leadership. And so leadership comes from that visionary agility. And you can actually think about using these four agilities, mixing that with visionary, and all the time tempering it and saying, okay, this is a strategic thing to do in this particular context. And as a result, it's a very context sensitive application. Now, one other thing that I want to stress here is that most of the time, we're firefighting, but that's a misnomer in some sense. Firefighters actually prepare for various kinds of eventualities. They're not just responding to the situation. So they have fire drill exercises, they have various chemicals that they use in various kinds of settings. So what they're doing is actually anticipating problems and having solutions ready. At most, they will have to adapt the solution that they have come up with a little given the context of the fire. So same thing here. As leaders, we should actually be anticipating problems and have solutions that are there that we can quickly adapt and apply to the current situation that we have. And that is a big thing that we need to be thinking about. So agility is a mindset, okay, that we need to be thinking about different kinds of things that are happening, that may happen. How would I solve this problem? And so some of the fun exercises I give people is things like, imagine you've been locked out of your car and your cell phone is locked up inside the house because that's also your keys are also there in the car. And so, how do you handle this problem? How would you solve this problem? Of course, if you start thinking about this problem before it happens, then you've thought of some things, right? Maybe I leave a window ajar somewhere. Maybe I have my neighbor's number with neighbors to whom I can go. And so these are questions that these are problems that you've already solved in your mind, and you can actually apply them. So this is what is called exercising leadership agilities. And so you will actually have these problems solved beforehand and you can apply them. So the context sensitivity, 5 agilities, which is a big thing because, it goes beyond, it breaks down the concept of, oh, we have to be nimble, we have to be agile to solve a problem that's come up. We break that down into 5 different ways of solving it and then applying that in a strategic way. And then anticipating problems and being prepared for various kinds of settings. Okay, and these settings can be very simple. Simple things like, my child's school bus broke down and she doesn't have a ride to school. Or it could be quite precipitous, saying, I've just received an email from the federal government saying my research funds have been cut. So how do you solve these problems? So these are things that are, where the agilities come in. And if you have anticipated these issues and you have some solutions ready, you can apply them. But even if you haven't, a kind of a systematic thinking through these 5 agilities allows us to be much more, exert much more leadership than if we didn't. Okay, so now I have time for questions. We have got quite a lot of time, so I'm open to questions. I've just presented the BRAVE framework. Of course, the contexts are multiple in which this can be applied, and a lot of people I know are thinking about how to handle the current environment, especially in the United States.
Thank you so much, Baba. And thank you for everyone who's already submitted a question. If you have not yet, but you have one, just a reminder that you want to click on your bottom bar of Zoom, click on Q&A and type and submit your questions there. And that is where we'll be pulling the questions to ask Dr. Prasad. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I especially really loved your comparison to fire drills and, being prepared for the uncertainty. And the first questioner asked a really great question, which is, how do you balance having a genuine response in the moment with the preparation and anticipation of what problems could arise?
Yeah, this is a thing that comes with practice, but it can be easily mastered, like what Arend, showed. You have to have that. I think one of the key things is that you have to be genuinely empathetic. Okay? You have to, unless you're genuinely empathetic, that sham will show. That you're putting up a show just for um, for people and for public, that will show. So unless you have to cultivate that idea of being genuinely authentic. So and that comes, if you're already responding from a place of inner feeling, empathy, it's not easy. It's not difficult to achieve. But then the question then is, how do you take that authenticity and transform it to meet some solutions? And that's where the agility comes in. That, hey, I have this genuine kind of empathy. How do I bring that into operations? What should I do in terms of operations? What do I do in terms of inventions? Is there some things that are missing here that I can actually create? What do I do in terms of analysis? So, okay, how do I really analyze this particular problem? And that's, in this case of the New Zealand massacre, you came up with, she came up with the idea that they're all systemically linked, that there is online provocation, there's platforms that provide this kind of radicalization, and that's connected to feelings of neglect. So you bring this holistic kind of framework, and that only comes once you have that intention to be empathetic. So that's how you would combine that.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Another person asked, what is the right balance? How much emphasis are you putting on each agility?
Yeah. So typically, if we were God, we'd have all five agilities, right? In equal measure, and we could just do that. But we're all limited because we're human. So sometimes we are more analytical. Some of us are more analytical. Some of us are more communicative. So what happens is that our response typically is coming from our predilections, right? Our affinities, our assumptions, our biases. So we have to be, once you're aware of that, then that allows you to step beyond that. So if you're not aware that you're responding to some solution with a bias, then you're kind of limited in how you respond. So what you should what we should develop is a idea of awareness that says, you know what, I'm responding to every kind of problem in the same kind of way. So maybe there's something wrong, and I build this. So what I would say is that the balance is actually driven by the context. So different problems will require different kinds of responses, different kinds of agilities. And one thing that I've done in my consulting and in work with corporate world is help think about teams. So if I'm, for instance, very good analytically, somebody else might be very good communicatively. So as a team, we have both these strengths, and we can respond to that. So the question of putting together teams in a different way than functionality, so I'm a accountant, and I'm a inventive R&D guy, and I bringing all these teams together. That's the typical way organizations put teams together in terms of basic functions. Here's a different way to think about it. How about agilities? I'm good at analytical agility. I'm good at communicative agility. Somebody else is good at, inventive agility. Can I put a team together that's more balanced? So that's an interesting way to think about how do I make up for when I don't have the agility, but as a team, we need that agility.
Thank you. I really love that. That's such an interesting solution. And the next question is also about teams. So it's a perfect transition, which is, how do we coach our team members to be more visionary in their overall approach to work items so that they're thinking about downstream and future impacts?
Exactly, yeah. So it is a question of putting that problem in that long-term perspective. So yes, we solve this problem. What does it mean to solve this problem? Is our solution going to come and bite us in the future? And I'll give you a very good example for that, where a lot of good-hearted scientists in the mid-60s and early 70s came up with a solution to handle the world's hunger problem. In the 60s and 70s, the world was going through a hunger crisis, and we were not producing enough for us to consume. Consumption was leading much more than production. So a bunch of scientists, agricultural scientists, came up with something called green revolution, okay, where they could get more extract out of wheat farms than was. I mean, wheat farms would be twice as productive actually. And they had a set of principles that they would form, using fertilizers, using groundwater, using certain farming practices, etc. And then they went in and they took this across the world. And unfortunately, one of the key things was the dependence on groundwater. So take away the dependence on seasonal rainfall and rivers. They said, let's tap groundwater. And that was a very, very smart move because it removed all the uncertainty with the weather. Okay? But in some sense, what happened 10 years later, they didn't anticipate that the groundwater table would fall. So then what happened was, as the groundwater table fell, farmers again went into the same kind of things that they thought they had moved off from, which is, lack of money to, the pumps cost more to go deeper and deeper into the ground to get water out. And so as a result, you go into the same loan cycles and lots of farmer suicides and things like that. So this is a case that shows that unless you've thought of the long term, your solution may actually lead to something that's detrimental. So you have to get down in groups and say, okay, this is a great solution for the present. What will happen in the future? You don't have to think too much in the future because today's world is so fast moving. You just have to think a year or two beyond the current moment. And then you can see how this actually might trap you into doing things in some ways. And that's how you would think of the strategic implications of this solution.
Thank you. And I also want to just give a quick reminder. I'm seeing some of the questions are coming in through the chat, and that's okay. I'm going to do my best to try to keep track of both places, but it would be much better if they were all coming to the same place. So a reminder that if you do have a question, please bring it over to the Q&A, not the chat. That's going to make it a lot easier for us to keep track and answer as many questions as possible. But thank you for asking all of them. These questions are great. Another question that is related to teams and workplaces is, have you ever experienced a toxic work culture that's not very open to leadership agility? How do you transcend that barrier?
Okay. There is a very nice question because it reminds me of a consulting exercise we did once in India. This was a software company that was growing rapidly. Within a couple of years, they'd grown from a 20-member team to 300 members. And they called us in because of this exact same term that they used, toxic work culture. Okay. There was a lot of fighting within the organizations. Teams were not participating, teams were not collaborating with each other, and things like that. So we went in and did some analysis, and we discovered that this company had, of course, rapidly expanded. And its clients were now not just in India, but across the world, Scandinavia, Australia, especially. And what was happening was that these people were not, especially the business development people, were not very familiar with talking in different languages, apart from the Indian languages they knew. And so when they went in to negotiate, they got stuck with hard bargains. The clients were demanding much more at much lower costs. And when they brought these problems back, when they brought these contracts back to the workplace, the people who had to do the work were naturally quite upset with what they were doing. Long hours, low pace, and so this was boiling down, and so teams were not participating. So what we suggested were two things. One, and also the second thing that we discovered was that these people in this organization were just doing rote jobs, all the time. It was the same kind of work, doing the same kind of things day in, day out. And that was getting very, very toxic for them as individuals. So we said, do two things. One, please introduce a communications training platform. So some ways for people to come in and train them in English and how to negotiate, negotiation exercises, etc. And the second thing we suggested, borrowing again from an idea that Google does, we said, these guys are getting so bored in their jobs, they actually need to have some downtime to do something creative. So can you give them half a day a week to do work on any project that they want? So they can actually do some inventive stuff in that time frame. And so what happened was we came back and studied them about 6 months later, and quite a lot of the problems had come down. Okay. Not that they had disappeared, but quite a lot of the problems had come down. Communication was much better within the organization. And then they were also lucky for us that they implemented this. So, I mean, there are cultures in which people don't want to implement this, and we can't help them. But this management was open to implementing those workshops and trainings, exercises for negotiations and communications. And secondly, they were also willing to give that half day off. And it helped that it was a 300-person company, so it's not a huge organization. And these things really had dramatic effect. So this is what I would say, that we need to think about what kinds of ways can we bolster the kind of things that are happening there. But again, coming back to analytical agility, analyze the problem. That's where we started. How do you analyze the problem to understand what the root causes are, and then build from there to include the other kinds of agilities.
Thank you. Next question is actually relatively similar, which I think is interesting. It shows that there is a real trend in what's on top of mind, but this one's a little bit more specific. So this one is saying that in today's world, leaders tend to respond out of anger. What is your advice to us as we navigate the workplaces where problems make it very easy for leaders not to respond, like Jacinda Ardern? What can we do to support our leaders to be positive in their responses?
Yeah, very, very good question. So I've been talking about reactive responses, and I gave you the example of marching to the school to challenge the principal, which is a reactive response out of anger. But anger is necessary to some extent because it allows us to be operational. It moves us out from us, from our chair, and to get out and do some stuff, right? So, but then uncontrolled anger is not a good thing, right? That's where the reactive responses come. And so that's why the visionary agility, which is, think about the long term. What's the impact of you going and making that scene out there? What is the impact of you responding in a harsh way to somebody? What does that lead? Does it, because life often, all the time, I think life is what we call in economics a repeated game. Okay, you never play that game one time. You continually playing. So today you fire, you have angry words with your colleague. Tomorrow you're going to interact with the same colleague, right? So what does it do? So now you temper your stuff with thinking about the long term, right? So beyond the current situation. So then that leads us to thinking about a different kind of approach to the problem, where we say, okay, we have to handle this, we have to have a fair conversation, but try to minimize the anger and have the conversation without anger. So we're solving the problem in a long-term fashion. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you. I really love that answer. I think that's really great. And I hadn't heard the term of it being a repeat game, but that resonates so much. It makes a ton of sense. Another question I really loved was someone asked the question of how agile do you need to be in your vision in order to respond to unexpected changes?
Now, this is not we cannot actually answer this in a mathematical way or in a quantitative way. All that will happen is that you need to be thinking long term. Okay. So as I said, it depends on context. Your kid is going to be in school for some time, so maybe think for that time. So what kind of stuff can happen. But basically, think about the long term beyond today. If you can think beyond the current moment, current situation, the present way in which you're handling things. So if you can think about being beyond that, then that's where your response will be strategic. So you can't really say, oh, this is how much you have to be visionary this is how much visionary agility you must have, or this is the long term that you need to develop, these many years or these many days. It all depends on context. And so, but the basic assumption is that you think beyond today, beyond now.
Thank you. Next question is more at a societal level rather than organizational level. And it said, in a heterogeneous society like the US, which is a melting pot with diverse culture, which of the leadership agilities can we implement in the most strategic manner to get the population to be more united and face our challenges as a nation and stop fighting against each other?
Fantastic question. Some years ago, when I was developing this framework, I happened to speak to a professor at Princeton called, um, you know, he was talking about organizing for democratic change at a social level, at a grassroots level. And there's a lot of work on that stuff. So for instance, Harvard has Marshall Kans, who works on social change and social leadership and grassroots democracy. So this is where I think a lot of these agilities will come in, okay? Because it is very difficult, and people know this for a fact, that when there's a very powerful force that's kind of not letting you do what you should be doing in terms of democracy, then you're faced with the challenge of how do we do this stuff? How do we unite? How do we get a common message? How do we be democratic in our thinking, right? And then the question is, don't go big picture, don't go into the nationwide kind of change. Begin very small in your local communities and try to develop a group kind of group that is very, very agile in the local thing. So, for instance, how would you handle, a small election that's happening in the neighborhood? How would you win an election there? How would you actually uh, spread the message of democracy in a small group and start to build up? So, what you would call leadership from the downside, from below, right? Leadership from below, where you're basically talking about not being leaders who have been given titles, but actually let that leadership emerge from down below and use these agilities, because you will face a lot of kind of, a lot of these unknown uncertainty, um, unknown situations that will develop as you're exerting your leadership at a ground level. And how do you develop the capabilities to handle that? So if you can do that at a small level, then that capability builds up to a larger level. So I would say start at the county level, start at the, even the small district level, and build that up from ground up.
Yeah, that's an incredible answer. One person wants to turn your own rhetorical question against you. So they asked, how would you answer the question of what would it take to operationalize empathy in your own leadership?
Yeah, I think I kind of addressed this in my first response. First, I think we need to have genuine empathy. Okay? We cannot fake empathy. And so to have genuine empathy, you must emote with the situation. Okay? And the best way is, of course, to put ourselves in the situation of those people, okay, with whom you want to empathize. So then you say, okay, if I want to do this, if I am empathetic, then what are the questions that I will need to answer to make this empathy become more practical? Okay? It's not just a feeling inside me, but what can I do to help the situation? So do I have to do operations? What kind of the inventions do I need to create? Do I need to create new processes? Do I need to put together new groups or communication patterns? How do I actually talk about communicating with different groups to express this empathy? And those kinds of things. So it all stems from that very fact. So, one of the key things about visionary agility is that you think beyond me, right? So once you start thinking that beyond me and you say, okay, where is the empathy coming from? Do I have that empathy? What should I do with that empathy? Then you start thinking about the operationalizing part. So that's where I would say that you can take this framework and apply it and say, okay, I have empathy. Now, what are the operational agilities that I will need to make this empathy become a practical thing, have practical impact? What are the communication strategies that I will need to develop to make people aware of my empathy? Those are questions that will. So for each of these agilities, you can take that and start to ask those questions. That's how one would operationalize it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think we have probably time for just one more. And so I like this one. I think this is a good one to end. It seems that you build your agilities capacities through experience and reflection. How do we approach preparing each of the 5 agilities?
Very interesting question. So what I would say is, in my book, of course, I have some case studies, but what you could do is just start with speculation. Okay. So let's say that you have to do something without an essential ingredient, okay? Something that's essential to solve that problem. Suppose you don't have it, what would you do? So if you ask yourself that question, then you start thinking in new ways. Okay, I don't have this, so can I solve this problem still? That'll lead you to start preparing. So I said one of the key things for you to be agile is to prepare for fictional or speculative scenarios. Okay? And once you start preparing that, then you're automatically thinking about ways to develop that agility. So that's how you would actually develop these 5 agilities. Thinking, so putting yourself, very simple question to ask is, what would happen if I do this in 2 years or 3 years from now? If I take this track, what would happen in, let's say, 2 months from now? So putting ourselves in different kinds of time frame, that will help you develop visionary agility, right? Asking questions about, if this is not working, what else can work? So for instance, if for instance my washing machine breaks down, what would I do? It's an everyday scenario, right? If for instance in my workplace a critical person on my team drops out, he or she are not said they would drop out, but suppose they drop out, how have I prepared myself? So that's an agility kind of preparation. So for operational agility. So similarly, you can keep asking these questions, constructing the scenarios, and preparing how to handle that. And that allows you to develop that agility.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. This is a series. So our Lessons in Leadership series of masterclasses is one that we do every month. And I saw in the chat, one person mentioned that they were at the last one on emotional intelligence, and I'm really excited you came to both. Thank you for being here for both. As I'm putting a link in the chat right now for the next one. The next one is going to be on June 11th. And this topic is pretty different. So we have been kind of concentrating on a lot of people were at the last one too. That's great. We have been focusing a lot on the human side of the skill spectrum recently. And then this next one, we're going to do a little bit of a shift and we're going to look at the technology side of the skill spectrum. So this one is on how to use AI to enhance your marketing campaigns. So I'm really curious to see if this is going to be an area that you are interested in as well. And we'd love to see you. It's going to be on June 11th, a Wednesday at noon. Thank you all so much for being here today. We always love having you. You always ask incredible questions, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And thank you, Baba, for an incredible
It was
presentation.
lovely being with you all. It's a lovely time of the year when the spring is just peeking around like a child around the door. So go enjoy, and I hope I've given you something to reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.